People labeled him useless, a shattered individual who lacked the ability to properly secure a saddle on horseback. However, what remained unknown about this silent ranch worker cleaning out stalls in the sweltering Texas heat would shortly cause an entire military unit to stand in respectful formation. The merciless sun burned overhead at Broken Arrow Ranch as Thaddius McKenzie hunched over a mound of horse dung, his worn hands clutching the shovel's handle so tightly his knuckles became pale. Perspiration fell from his graying whiskers onto the stable's earthen floor, each droplet combining with decades of humiliation he bore like a boulder in his soul. Now 52 years old, his spine ached with each motion, though this pain paled compared to enduring the way younger workers regarded him as merely broken furniture. Jeremiah Caldwell's harsh voice sliced through the dawn air like the snap of a leather whip. The ranch supervisor marched into the stable, his footwear striking the timber planks with the pride of someone who'd never experienced true suffering. His frigid steel-colored gaze examined McKenzie's labor with revulsion typically saved for something scraped from a boot sole. Caldwell expelled saliva into the straw near McKenzie's boots. "Pick up the pace, elderly fool. Mr. Harrison expects distinguished visitors this afternoon, and I refuse to have this location resembling a barnyard because of your sluggishness." His statements oozed with disdain as he circled McKenzie like a scavenger evaluating its next meal. McKenzie's muscles tensed, yet he remained silent, having discovered long before that quiet served as his sole protection against individuals like Caldwell. The supervisor moved nearer, his silhouette casting darkness over the veteran like storm clouds. "Do you hear my words, McKenzie, or has all that alcohol finally destroyed whatever remains of your mind?" The remaining ranch workers clustered at the stable's opening, their mockery reverberating off the walls as they observed their regular amusement. To them, McKenzie represented nothing beyond entertainment. The damaged soldier who'd lost everything and now scraped animal waste for sustenance and lodging. Yet McKenzie lifted his shoulders, his steel-blue gaze meeting Caldwell's stare briefly. Something dangerous flashed there, causing Caldwell to retreat half a pace before regaining composure. When McKenzie finally responded, his voice emerged steady as granite. "Your words reach me clearly, Mr. Caldwell." The supervisor's complexion reddened with rage at the quiet rebellion in McKenzie's manner. He lifted his arm as though to strike, but something in the elderly man's bearing froze him completely. There existed something about how McKenzie maintained his posture despite years of manual labor, shoulders positioned like someone who confronted worse dangers than a ranch foreman's anger. Instead, Caldwell seized the shovel from McKenzie's grasp and hurled it across the stable. "Clear this disorder using only your hands. Perhaps it will instruct you regarding proper respect." He pivoted sharply and departed angrily, his footsteps echoing his rage with every stride. As the workers' laughter disappeared into the distance, McKenzie knelt and began gathering the scattered implements. His hand shook slightly, not from terror, but from the struggle to prevent himself from actions he might later regret. Because hidden beneath years of shame and shattered aspirations lived someone who'd once earned the respect of thousands. None of them realized that the approaching sound of hoofbeats would transform everything within hours. When the dust cleared, every ranch hand would comprehend exactly whom they'd been treating like refuse. The hoofbeats intensified, rumbling across the arid plains like distant thunder. McKenzie's attention snapped upward from his task, his experienced ear instantly detecting what other workers couldn't: the exact rhythm of military mounts moving in organized formation. His heart began hammering against his chest as buried memories started clawing toward consciousness. Caldwell rushed back into the stable, his expression twisted with alarm. "McKenzie, prepare those horses immediately. Cavalry approaches, and Mr. Harrison demands this place appear flawless." The supervisor's previous arrogance had vanished, replaced by anxious energy of someone whose employment depended on impressing the right individuals. Through the stable entrance, McKenzie observed dust clouds rising on the distant horizon. The sound of clinking spurs and creaking leather grew nearer each second. His hands operated automatically, readying the horses, but his mind traveled elsewhere, back to battlefields where identical sounds meant the difference between triumph and destruction. Other ranch hands scrambled about like startled fowl, attempting to appear industrious. Yet McKenzie noticed something they missed: how Caldwell kept glancing at him suspiciously, as if questioning why the old drunkard seemed so composed while everyone else panicked. A young worker named Billy stumbled into the stable, his face ashen with excitement and fear. "Mr. Caldwell, sir, an entire company of soldiers rides up our main path. Their leader wears more gold decoration than I've ever witnessed." Caldwell cursed quietly and grasped Mackenzie's shoulder, his fingers pressing like talons. "Listen carefully, old man. Keep silent when these soldiers arrive. Don't shame this ranch with your intoxicated babbling. Do you comprehend?" Mackenzie looked down at Caldwell's grip on his shoulder, then slowly lifted his gaze to meet the supervisor's stare. Something passed between them that loosened Caldwell's hold and shook his confidence. "I comprehend completely, Mr. Caldwell." The sound of horses stopping outside made everyone freeze. Heavy boots struck ground with military precision, followed by sharp officer commands organizing their troops. Mackenzie's pulse accelerated, hearing a voice absent for 10 years, belonging to someone who'd once served under his leadership. Caldwell straightened his vest and forced a false smile while preparing to welcome their unexpected guests. "Remember my instructions, Mackenzie, not one word." But as the first blue uniform appeared in the doorway, Mackenzie felt something awakening within him that had remained dormant far too long. The young officer's bearing, the respect in his voice addressing his men, the gleaming brass buttons catching sunlight. Everything reminded Mackenzie of his former identity. When the officer's eyes swept the stable and settled on the weathered ranch hand standing in shadows, Mackenzie witnessed something that chilled his blood recognition that could either rescue him or destroy what little existence remained. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb entered the stable, his polished boots clicking against wooden flooring with measured rhythm of someone who'd spent his life in uniform. Afternoon sunlight caught silver eagles on his shoulders, but his eyes commanded attention, sharp, intelligent, currently focused on a figure hunched over horse equipment in the corner. Caldwell rushed forward like an eager puppy, hands clasped behind his back in what he presumably considered military posture. "Colonel Webb, sir, welcome to Broken Arrow Ranch. I'm Jeremiah Caldwell, supervisor of this operation. How may we serve the United States Army?" Webb's attention never left Mackenzie, who became perfectly motionless except for hands, continuing their work with steady precision of someone trying to remain invisible. The colonel's weathered face showed no expression, but something flickered behind his eyes, surprise, confusion, perhaps something deeper. "We're surveying local resources for plan for construction," Webb stated, his voice carrying authority of someone accustomed to obedience. "We'll need to evaluate your livestock, water supply, and..." His words faded as Mackenzie slowly turned around. The two men regarded each other across the dusty stable, and time seemed suspended. Webb's face paled beneath his tan, his mouth opening slightly as though seeing a ghost. Mackenzie straightened to full height, and momentarily, the broken ranch hand vanished, replaced by something else entirely, something that changed the very atmosphere. Caldwell, oblivious to tension crackling between them, continued his nervous chatter. "Certainly, Colonel, whatever the Army requires, we're pleased to provide, though I should mention some workers aren't exactly dependable." He shot a meaningful look at Mackenzie. "We employ this old drunkard who creates more problems than solutions." Webb's jaw tightened, his gaze never leaving Mackenzie's face when he spoke. His voice remained carefully controlled, but something dangerous lurked beneath. "Is that accurate, Mr. Caldwell? What exactly makes you believe this man is undependable?" The question hung like smoke from gunpowder. Mackenzie felt his heart pounding as he watched Webb's expression shift from shock to something resembling anger. Not at him, but at the situation he discovered his former commander in. Caldwell, encouraged by what he mistook for interest, warmed to his topic. "Well, sir, he's merely a broken-down former soldier who can't manage his drinking. Probably witnessed too much combat, if you understand. We keep him from Christian kindness, but he's more burden than benefit." The following silence was overwhelming. Webb's hands clenched into fists, and Mackenzie could see the vein throbbing in the colonel's temple. The younger officer who'd entered behind Webb appeared confused, glancing between his commander and the ranch hand, as if solving a puzzle. Webb stepped forward, his voice dropping to barely audible. "Mr. Caldwell, I believe there's something you should understand about your broken-down former soldier." Mackenzie shook his head almost imperceptibly, a silent request for Webb to leave matters undisturbed. But the colonel had already decided, and Mackenzie could see in his eyes there would be no retreat. The moment of revelation had arrived, and everything Mackenzie had constructed, or rather, everything he'd hidden behind, was about to collapse around him. Webb's voice sliced through the stable like a cavalry blade. "Mr. Caldwell, the man you just labeled a broken-down former soldier is Colonel Thaddius McKenzie, the identical Colonel McKenzie who defended Antietam Creek for 3 days against impossible circumstances. The same individual who preserved my life and the lives of 200 soldiers under his command." The word struck Caldwell like a physical assault. His expression transformed from smug confidence to deathly pale terror within a heartbeat. Other ranch hands who'd gathered to observe the spectacle suddenly found their footwear extremely fascinating, shuffling backward as if distance could somehow shield them from what they'd just heard. Mackenzie closed his eyes and released a slow breath. A decade of carefully constructed anonymity had just evaporated like morning mist. He labored so intensively to become nobody, to disappear among the crowd of damaged men who'd survived the war but lost everything else. Now the protective barrier was crumbling, exposing wounds that had never properly mended. "Colonel," Caldwell's voice emerged as barely a whisper. But you're just what?" Webb moved closer to the supervisor, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Just someone who sacrificed everything for his nation? Just a hero who lost his family, his wealth, and his standing because politicians required someone to blame for their failures?" The younger officer behind Webb snapped to attention as understanding dawned. Even the horses seemed to detect the atmospheric shift, snorting and stamping restlessly in their stalls. Mackenzie stood frozen at the center of it all, watching his carefully constructed new existence crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. Caldwell's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for breath. He looked from Webb to Mackenzie and back, tried to process the impossible reality. This man he'd been treating like garbage, this broken ranch hand he'd humiliated daily, was a decorated war hero who commanded thousands of soldiers in battle. I was unaware," Caldwell stammered, sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool, stable air. "He never mentioned. I mean, how was I supposed to—" Mackenzie finally found his voice, though it emerged rough as sandpaper. "Because I did want your knowledge, Marcus. I came here to vanish, not to be remembered." His eyes met Webb's with a mixture of gratitude and resignation. Some matters are better left buried. But Webb shook his head firmly. "Not this, Thaddeus. Not you." He turned back to Caldwell, his voice carrying military authority's full weight. This man single-handedly altered the war's direction. When everyone else withdrew, he remained firm. When politicians sacrificed him to wolves, he accepted it with dignity. If you were Caldwell, what would you do? Apologize desperately hoping for forgiveness, or double down claiming you followed orders? Tell me in the comments. I need to know how you'd handle discovering you've been humiliating a war hero. Because what Caldwell decided next would determine whether this confrontation ended in redemption or complete destruction. The ranch hands began whispering among themselves, their voices carrying awe and fear. Some were veterans themselves and knew the stories. They'd heard legends whisper around campfires and in frontier saloons, and now they realized they'd been working alongside living history. Mackenzie straightened his shoulders, and for the first time in years, he resembled the man he used to be. Caldwell dropped to his knees on a hay-strewn stable floor, his entire body trembling like a leaf in a thunderstorm. The sight of the arrogant supervisor groveling sent shockwaves through every ranch hand present. Words tumbled from his mouth in desperate haste. "Colonel Mackenzie, sir, I had no knowledge. Please, you must understand. I never would have if I'd known your identity." Mackenzie looked down at the man who'd made his existence miserable for 3 years, and something unexpected stirred his chest. Not satisfaction or revenge, but deep, bone-weary sadness. "Rise, Caldwell. No man should grovel in dirt, regardless of his actions." But Caldwell remained kneeling, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I called you worthless. I forced you to clean stables with bare hands. I treated a war hero like someone who'd lost everything." Mackenzie finished quietly, "which is precisely what I still am." He extended his hand to help Caldwell stand, but the supervisor refused to accept it, as if he didn't deserve even that small gesture of forgiveness. Webb observed the scene with barely contained emotion. Behind him, more soldiers had gathered at the stable entrance, drawn by the commotion. When word spread that they were in a legendary Colonel Mackenzie's presence, whispers grew louder. Some younger soldiers had heard stories from their fathers, tales of impossible courage and heartbreaking sacrifice. Young Billy, the ranch hand who'd announced the cavalry's arrival, stepped forward with tears in his eyes. "Colonel, sir, my father fought at Antietam. He always said there was this officer who saved his entire regiment when they got pinned down by Confederate artillery. That was you, wasn't it?" Mackenzie's throat constricted. He remembered that day. The screams of wounded soldiers, the acrid gunpowder smell, the impossible choice between retreat and annihilation. Your father was courageous. Son, they all were. The stable had become a memory shrine, with men who'd never known war standing beside those who'd lived through its horrors. But the moment's weight was almost too much for Mackenzie to bear. He'd spent a decade trying to forget, trying to become invisible. Now the past was rushing back, like a flood breaking through a dam. Webb stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Thaddius, you cannot keep hiding from your true identity. These men deserve to know they've been working alongside a genuine American hero." Mackenzie's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Hero?" His voice cracked with bitter laughter. "Marcus, do you know what I've been doing for the past decade? Drinking myself unconscious nightly, trying to forget the faces of men who died because of my orders, living in flop houses and working for men like Caldwell because I couldn't face the world that moved on without me." The silence stretched like a taut rope, ready to snap. Every man in that stable could feel the weight of Mackenzie's pain, the crushing burden of survivor's guilt that had driven him into exile. But they could also see something else, the unbreakable core of honor that had sustained him through war and its aftermath. Webb's voice was steady as bedrock when he spoke. "And yet here you are, still standing, still fighting, even if it's just against your own demons." He turned to address the assembled men. "That's what creates a hero, gentlemen. Not the absence of fear or pain, but the courage to continue despite them. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel." But Mackenzie wasn't finished. The dam had broken, and years of suppressed emotion came pouring out. What he said next would either complete his redemption or shatter him entirely. Mackenzie's voice cracked like breaking glass as the words poured from him. "You want to know why I disappeared, Marcus? Why I let everyone believe I was dead? It's because I should be. Every man who died under my command should be standing here instead of me. I lived when better men didn't. And that's a burden I'll carry until my final breath." The stable fell silent except for the soft snorting of horses and the distant sound of wind through the eaves. Webb's face had gone pale, understanding finally dawning in his eyes. He'd wondered for years why his commanding officer had vanished after the war, why a man of Mackenzie's caliber had simply disappeared into frontier like smoke. "Colonel," Webb said softly, "what happened at Petersburg wasn't your fault. The intelligence was wrong. No one could have known." "Stop." Mackenzie's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Don't you dare try to absolve me of what I did. I sent 200 boys into a trap because I trusted information that was 3 days old. I watched them die because I was too proud to admit I might be wrong." Caldwell, still kneeling in the dirt, looked up with confusion written across his tear-stained face. "Colonel, what are you talking about? Petersburg wasn't in any of the stories I heard." Webb closed his eyes, understanding the terrible burden his old commander had been carrying. "That you saved 3,000 men at Antietam. One mistake doesn't erase a lifetime of heroism." But Mackenzie shook his head violently, his hands trembling with the force of memory. "Those boys had families, Marcus. Wives who waited for letters that never came. Children who grew up without fathers because I was too stubborn to question orders from Washington." Young Billy stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, my older brother died at Petersburg. Tommy Garrison. He was only 19. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Mackenzie felt his knees nearly buckle. "I'm sorry," Mackenzie whispered, the words inadequate but all he had. "God help me, I'm so sorry." But Billy surprised everyone by stepping closer, his young face serious beyond his years. "Colonel, sir, Tommy wrote to us before that battle. He said his commanding officer was the finest man he'd ever known. Said you'd visit the wounded yourself, that you knew every soldier's name. He was proud to serve under you, even at the end. The revelation hit Mackenzie like a physical blow. He staggered backward, catching himself against a wooden post as tears he'd held back for a decade finally broke free. Around the stable, hardened men wiped their eyes, understanding for the first time the true cost of war, not just for those who died, but for those who lived with the weight of command. Webb stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. That's what they never tell you about heroes, isn't it? That sometimes surviving is the hardest battle of all. Mackenzie looked around at the faces surrounding him, Caldwell still on his knees, the ranch hands standing with newfound respect, the soldiers who'd heard legends but were now seeing the broken man behind them. He was at a crossroads, and what he chose to do next would determine whether he remained a ghost of the past or finally found a way to live with his ghosts. The sound of approaching horses interrupted the moment, but these hoofbeats were different, urgent, desperate. Someone was riding hard toward the ranch, and whatever news they carried would change everything once again. A lone rider burst through the ranch gates, his horse lathered with sweat and foam flying from his mouth. The man in the saddle wore the uniform of a cavalry scout, his face grim with the kind of urgency that meant life or death. He pulled up short outside the stable, dust swirling around his mount as he leaped to the ground. "Colonel Webb," the scout shouted, his voice hoarse from hard riding. "Sir, we got trouble. Big trouble." He rushed into the stable, his eyes wild with panic as he spotted his commanding officer among the gathered men. Webb snapped into military mode instantly, his personal emotions shelved in favor of immediate necessity. "Report, Sergeant Morrison. What's the situation?" Morrison glanced nervously at the civilians present, but Webb waved him on. "Speak freely, Sergeant. What's happened?" "Sir, it's the Apache. Chief Running Bear's broken out of the reservation with about 50 warriors. They hit the Whitman homestead 2 hours ago. Killed the whole family except for a little girl. She managed to hide and escape, but..." Morrison's voice cracked. "Sir, they're heading this way. Our scouts estimate they'll reach this area by sundown." The blood drained from every face in the stable. Apache raids were the stuff of nightmares on a frontier, swift, brutal, and merciless. Caldwell finally scrambled to his feet, his earlier humiliation forgotten in the face of immediate danger. "How far out are they?" Webb demanded, his mind already calculating distances and response times. "Maybe 3 hours, sir. But here's the thing." Morrison hesitated, glancing again at the civilians. "They're not just raiding randomly. Word is Running Bear's looking for someone specific, someone who fought against his brother at Canyon Creek 5 years ago." Mackenzie felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Canyon Creek. The name hit him like a physical blow, dragging up memories he tried desperately to bury alongside all the others. His hands began to shake as he remembered that day, the desperate fight in the narrow canyon, the impossible odds, and the terrible choice he'd been forced to make. Webb's eyes snapped to Mackenzie, understanding dawning in his expression. "Thaddius, Canyon Creek. That was you, wasn't it? You led that operation." Mackenzie nodded slowly, his voice barely audible. Running Bear's brother was Chief Stonewolf. I had to choose between letting my men be slaughtered or..." He couldn't finish the sentence. The weight of that day, the decision that saved 40 soldiers but cost the life of a chief's brother, pressed down on him like a boulder. "Sir," Morrison continued urgently, "the Apache have been asking questions in every settlement they've hit. They know he's out here somewhere. They know about the colonel." Caldwell's face went white as bone. "They're coming here for him." He pointed a shaking finger at Mackenzie. "You brought this down on us. Your past is going to get us all killed." But before anyone could respond, young Billy stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "Then we fight. We don't hand over a hero to save our own skins." The other ranch hands murmured agreement, but Webb shook his head grimly. "Gentlemen, you don't understand. 50 Apache warriors against a handful of soldiers and civilians? Those aren't fighting odds. Those are dying odds." Mackenzie straightened slowly, and for the first time since Webb had arrived, he looked every inch the colonel he'd once been. His voice was steady, carrying the weight of command that no amount of humiliation could erase. Then I'll ride out to meet them. End this before it starts. Like hell you will, Webb shot back. I didn't find you again just to watch you throw your life away on some misguided sense of guilt. Outside, the afternoon sun was already beginning its descent toward the horizon. Time was running out, and somewhere in the distance, 50 Apache warriors rode toward a reckoning that had been 10 years in the making. Mackenzie stood at the center of it all, faced with the hardest decision of his life. Say himself and let innocent people die, or face his past one final time and hope he was still the man who'd once held impossible lines against impossible odds. The sound of metal being checked and weapons being loaded filled the stable, as every man present prepared for what might be their last fight. Mackenzie stepped out of the stable into the fading daylight, his weather hand steady as he checked his rifle one final time. Behind him, Webb soldiers and the ranch hands formed a ragged line of defense, but everyone knew the truth. They were preparing for a massacre, not a battle. The Apache appeared on the ridge like shadows materializing from the earth itself. 50 warriors on horseback, their war paint gleaming in the dying sun, formed a perfect crescent around the ranch. At their center rode Chief Running Bear, his face a mask of controlled fury as his eyes swept the buildings below until they found the man he'd spent 5 years hunting. Mackenzie walked forward alone, his boots crunching on the dusty ground as he moved away from the others. Every step felt like walking through quicksand, but his spine remained straight and his head held high. He was done running from his past. Running Bear. Mackenzie's voice carried across the distance between them, strong and clear despite the tremor in his chest. You want me? Here I am. These people had nothing to do with Canyon Creek. Let them live, and we'll settle this between us. The Apache chief urged his horse forward, stopping just 50 yards away. When he spoke, his English was perfect, tinged with an accent that made every word sound like a death sentence. Colonel Mackenzie, the man who killed my brother with his own hands. The man who broke his word and murdered Stonewolf under a flag of truce. Mackenzie felt the accusation hit him like a physical blow. Behind him, he heard Webb sharpen take a breath. The soldiers had heard rumors about Canyon Creek, but never the full truth. That's not what happened, and you know it, Mackenzie replied, his voice steady despite the chaos in his heart. Then tell me what happened, Running Bear demanded, his horse dancing nervously beneath him. Tell these men why Stonewolf died when he came to negotiate peace. The words came slowly, each one carved from stone. Your brother came to parley, yes, but he came with 20 warriors hidden in the rocks above. When my scout spotted them, he drew his knife. I had to choose between my men's lives and keeping the peace. Mackenzie's voice cracked. I chose my men. I've regretted it every day since. Running Bear's face showed no emotion, but something flickered in his dark eyes. And now? What do you choose now? Mackenzie slowly unbuckled his gun belt and let it fall to the ground. I choose to end this. Take me, but let these people live. They've got nothing to do with the sins of my past. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind whistling through the ranch buildings. Then Running Bear raised his hand, and the circle of warriors lowered their weapons. You speak truth, Colonel. Stonewolf would have done the same to protect his people. There has been enough death between us. The Apache chief wheeled his horse around and led his warriors back into the gathering darkness, leaving Mackenzie standing alone in the dust, finally free from the ghost that had haunted him for so long. As Webb and the others rushed to his side, Mackenzie realized something had changed inside him. The weight of command, the burden of impossible choices. They were still there, but now he could carry them without being crushed. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel. Mackenzie never returned to the ranch as a hired hand. Webb convinced him to accept a position training young officers at Fort Davis, where his experience could save lives instead of haunting him. Caldwell became his most unlikely ally, transforming the Broken Arrow into a refuge for veterans struggling with their own demons. And sometimes, on clear desert nights, they would see smoke signals in the distance, Running Bear's people, living in peace at last, honoring the courage of an old soldier who'd finally learned to forgive himself. Now, click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with a twist so powerful you won't forget it anytime soon. Click on the video.